It's not easy being a Christian in the world today. Join us as we discuss theology, church history, cults, philosophy, worldview, and apologetics. Intellectually engaging, humorous, and at times controversial, Ryan and Seth make the subject matter accessible to anyone, whether young or old, skeptical or mature believer. AnchorCast is a ministry of Anchor New England. Welcome to AnchorCast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Seth.
And here today we're going to be talking about all kinds of things, theological, church history, philosophy, and apologetics, and everything vaguely related to those things. So I'm excited about today's episode.
I am too, and excited to for the latest broadcast from the Anchor New England studios.
Yes, so we are in the bunker, the AnchorCast bunker.
The undisclosed location.
Yeah, we can't tell you where it is, but trust me, it's top secret. And you know, I think it's serving our purposes. It's really it's a nice little studio that we have here, and I think it's going to work well. It's going to work well for us here going forward. But before we really get into the meat of our discussion today, we're going to actually just kind of tease this out. We are going to discuss a book by C.S. Lewis called Spirits in Bondage. And this is actually kind of a little-known book by C.S. Lewis. Certainly not one of his most famous.
Yeah, I've read most of C.S. Lewis's well-known works. I had actually never heard of this one until recently. And in some ways completely different from the other things he's written, but in some ways not, as we'll see.
Yeah. So it's super interesting, and I think it definitely gives us some insight into who Lewis was, and even before he became a Christian, which is actually the vantage point or the lens through which he's writing is that of an atheist. So it's a really interesting discussion. But again, before we get into that today, I want to plug real quick the ministry. Anchor New England just completed a pilot episode of an animation that we've been working on for a few months here. It's called Theo's Ark. And the purpose of the animation is to actually introduce children to apologetics. And one of the reasons why we did this was because we felt like apologetics should be accessible to everybody. It should be accessible to everyone, not just adults, but also to kids. So we wanted to take some of these ideas, bring them down off from the top shelf, and allow students and children to interact with these ideas so that they could feel grounded in their faith.
And make it kind of fun.
And make it fun.
And make it easy for parents to talk to their kids.
Exactly. And so in a kind of sneaky way, too, we're introducing parents that might not be familiar with apologetics to the discipline of apologetics, teaching them how to know why they believe what they believe.
It's kind of like when you get the can of SpaghettiOs at the store and then it says, contains 1 full serving of vegetables. And you're like, what?
Right, exactly.
This is good for me?
Yeah, and so give me a spoon. Let's go. So if you go to anchornewengland.org, and I'll just kind of demonstrate here on our computer. If you go to anchornewengland.org and hover over store, there's a link there that says curriculum. If you just click on the curriculum link, that will bring you to the page which hosts the video. And there you'll find the Anchor New England video called Theo's Ark. And along with that also is a PDF workbook, which is really super interactive, very helpful. It explains all of the information related to the argument that's being communicated there. This particular episode, it's a pilot episode called In the Beginning, and it's about the cosmological argument. So it's about this idea that God created all things and that he is eternal and that he's the uncaused cause, he's the first cause. And it's actually going through and teaching kids about the logic of creation and of the description of creation that's in the scriptures. So it's really powerful, and we would certainly encourage everyone to check that out at anchornewengland.org. Again, you would want to hover over the store tab, click on curriculum, and you'll find your way there. And I would also add, while you're at anchornewengland.org, there are tons of other resources that you can check out there online. We have a podcast, obviously. This is the podcast. We have a blog that we're also hosting as well. We have a bunch of things there, some helpful tools and resources like books that we recommend. So check that out. It's really going to be helpful. And if you really like what you're seeing, what I would encourage you to do is consider supporting the ministry as well, because we want to be able to continue to produce and create this type of premium content. And I can tell you from going through this process, it is not an inexpensive process. So there was a serious investment. Thousands of dollars were invested, a lot of time, a lot of energy. So we would invite you to participate in this process.
And if you're a business owner or someone that runs an organization, consider sponsoring.
Yeah,
right?
that's
it's
right.
kind of like when you're in the restaurant and it has the placemat that says your business could be advertising here. Mm-hmm. We could be running a spot right now just for you.
Just for you. So consider that. And any way that you might be willing to help, obviously, praying is a huge thing. So pray for our ministry as well. And we would definitely appreciate that. And and also we could certainly swing by a church if that's something that the ministry was interested, and we can talk about what we're doing and talk about the value of apologetics in various church ministries. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation about C.S. Lewis and spirits in bondage. First of all, let's kind of discuss the background of the book. Now, this was Lewis's first publication. This was his first published work. And he was 20 years old when he wrote this, a full 12 years before he became a Christian. And he was clearly in a really strained sort of state of mind. We know that he was in the war, and so he certainly saw a lot of death. He certainly saw a lot of suffering. I mean, that affected his state of mind. That affected his mood, right?
For sure, and you see the product of that in these poems in this book.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing that we should mention, is that the book is a compilation of poetry. So it's not a narrative. If you're going on Amazon right now and putting it in your cart thinking, oh, this is going to be another Chronicles of Narnia type thing, it's not that at all. Although it has some themes that we'll see later on in some of his works as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I will say too that writing this as he did before he actually became a Christian, this is not one of his apologetic works either. No. This isn't Mere Christianity or The Great Divorce or The Abolition of Man or something like that.
Right.
You and I had, I think this happened privately, not in the last broadcast, but you and I had talked about art for art's sake. Does every piece of art have to be evangelistic? Well, we're going to discuss a piece of art today that's not explicitly evangelistic, and yet you can see the trajectory that Lewis is on. Mm-hmm. And I won't sort of spoil the ending. But.
Right. Well, I can see that there's definitely some questions involving spirituality. that are being addressed in this book. In fact, there's a poem called Satan in the book, and there are many poems which address the existence of God, albeit very antagonistically address the existence of God. And I will also say that he is definitely writing from a certain worldview perspective. There's a lot of mythology, which we've already mentioned. So there's mythological themes in here that make their way all throughout this book. But there's also this strain or this strand of Gnosticism that you can see also in the book. And do you want to just touch on what Gnosticism is for those who don't understand it?
Yes, absolutely. I can speak very cogently about Gnosticism for hours. Well, I mean, right. So there were different strains of Gnosticism, but I would say, in a nutshell, matter is evil.
Yeah.
The God who created the world is not the true God, as Gnostics would say, and there's a tendency to want to escape the things of the world into what is spiritual, or what they would view as spiritual. It also tends to be an emphasis on secret knowledge, right?
Right.
Only the true initiates have the key of knowledge,
The
or something like
Gnostikoi,
that.
or whatever they're called. Yeah. So, and you can see that kind of thing playing out in the arc of the storyline, or the structure of the book, and that it's broken up into three parts.
The title of the book is called Spirits in Bondage.
Right.
Maybe the bondage is to the material world.
Yeah, I sort of got that impression, and again, based on the structure of the book and how it's broken into those three parts. The first part is called, what's it called? The Prison House. And so there are a bunch of poems under the prison house. And then the next part two, is called Hesitation. And then part three is called The Escape. So there's almost this sense in which Lewis is trying to find this escape from matter, or from the suffering, or from everything that he's experienced in this world. And he knows intuitively that it's out there somewhere, but whatever the culture offers him for an answer vis-a-vis Christianity, or whatever, he certainly rejects very stridently in the pages of this book through several of the different poems.
Agreed. Yep. And I would say, first of all, you could excuse someone who had just been through war for wanting to escape misery,
For sure.
and for having a sense that has a direct connection to our material corporality, being able to be wounded and experience suffering and so on. But you can definitely see the trajectory toward some kind of spirituality. So, as you noted, having an antagonistic relationship with God, and yet he wants there to be a God. There's a number of poems where he says, angry sounding things about God. You make, this is not an exact quote, but saying things sort of like, you're the God who hides your face and things like that. But, you want there to be a God. Otherwise, why are you bringing it up?
Yeah. Another thing that I would mention is he is an avowed atheist at this point, and yet he seems very angry at the God which he's suggesting doesn't exist.
Which makes you a terrible atheist, actually.
Right.
It's like, when you meet someone who doesn't believe in God and they get all mad about it, it's like, who are you mad at?
Right.
This person who doesn't exist?
Right. And so Lewis seems to be having this internal battle that's really inconsistent with the worldview which he says that he has, and putting it on the page. I mean, I don't know if he's angry at the idea of God, perhaps, but it seems like a lot of his criticism is directly toward God in the pages of these poems.
It does, although he has a longing for this God. So, I mean, the first poem in the book is called Satan Speaks, and it's pretty angry, pretty brutal. But I told myself I wouldn't say in this broadcast as much as I did in the first one, working on it. That pretty brutal. And when you see that the poem's called Satan Speaks, you go, well, that's not going to be a joyful read, right? But despite all of the, the blurbs in the front and some of the reviews on Amazon, the book is not nearly as dark as I thought it would be. I actually found some glimmers of light in here. And there's one particular poem in here where he describes himself standing in the rain, wanting to enter the house of the beloved. Mm-hmm. He can see the lights on in this place, and he's out in the rain. That's a spiritual longing, right?
Sure.
Wanting to enter into the house of the beloved.
Yeah, he certainly he longs for community. That's clear. He longs for something that's transcendent. That's clear. But specifically what that transcendence is, it seems unclear.
So the poem I was thinking of is called Spooks, and in our edition of the book, it's on page 15. It begins, "Last night I dreamed that I was come again unto the house where my beloved dwells, after long years of wandering and pain. And I stood out beneath the drenching rain, and all the street was bare and black with night. But in my true love's house was warmth and light. Yet I could not draw near, nor enter in, and long I wondered if some secret sin or old unhappy anger held me fast." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but to me, that's a nice little glimmer of where Lewis is going. He's angry.
Yeah.
He's even angry at God, and yet he wants there to be a God, and he longs to enter into some kind of fellowship with somebody.
And he's wondering about some secret sin.
What have I done?
What have I done? So he clearly knows that there's this morality to which his soul is bound, albeit he doesn't understand what the implications of his sin nature actually are, or how it might be affecting his relationship with the transcendent. So I think that's a great insight. In fact, another insight that you made, and this is a quote directly from you, and I'm going to quote a text message that you actually sent me in preparation for this discussion. You said that you would characterize this book as, quote, "an atheist discovers an enchanted vision of the world," which I thought was really interesting and a really fascinating way to put it. What did you mean by an atheist discovers an enchanted vision of the world?
What I meant by that is that despite the anger and despite the lack of a relationship with the one that we would describe as, the transcendent God or the God of the Bible, he, in these poems, mentions supernatural elements to the world. So he'll describe a scene that at first may seem bleak and empty and even nihilistic, but then he goes on to describe fauns and fairies and satyrs. It's like, well, that's not how atheists talk. Those are
Right.
those are supernatural elements,
Right.
And you're bringing those into something that should be mundane or even bleak
Or mechanistic.
or mechanistic.
Right.
Yeah, so that's not the way that a materialist talks, right? I mean, when you speak with someone that has a materialist worldview, which is also the atheist view, you're not going to then talk about dragons and fairies and dwarves and things like that. And that's in one of our previous conversations, I had mentioned that there's a lot of Narnian elements in this book.
Sure.
He talks about sailing to the world's end, which is like a Prince Caspian type theme. He talks about all the wood fairies and spirits and things, which were all show up in the Narnian books and the movies. I think the poem that for me really encapsulates the concept of an atheist finding an enchanted vision of the world is the one that's entitled Our Daily Bread. And in it, I think the reason why it's called Our Daily Bread is he's talking about things that are regular and mundane and are everyday things, but then he does see a vision of God beyond those things. I'll just go ahead and read it. We need no barbarous words nor solemn spell to raise the unknown. It lies before our feet. There have been men who sank down into hell in some suburban street. And some there are that in their daily walks have met archangels fresh from sight of God, or watched how in their beans and cabbage stalks long files of fairies trod. Often me too the living voices call in many a vulgar and habitual place. I catch a sight of lands beyond the wall. I see a strange God's face. And some day this will work upon me so I shall arise and leave both friends and home, and over many lands a pilgrim go through alien woods and foam, seeking the last steep edges of the earth, whence I may leap into that gulf of light, wherein before my narrowing self had birth, part of me lived aright.
Yeah. So it almost seems like it's inevitable from that poem, doesn't it? He sounds like he's afraid that he's going in that direction.
But he knows he's going in that
he's
direction.
He's being drawn.
And I just love that in these mundane and habitual, and he even uses the word vulgar, by which he just means, I think it's common.
Yeah.
In these common settings, he says, I still catch a glimpse of this strange God. He doesn't know who it is yet. And I love how he seeks the last steep edges of the earth. He knows he's going to make that leap. I believe that's how the Narnian series ends. Don't they sail off the edge of the world?
Right, yeah. That's really fascinating. You can see kind of the seeds of his thought process already at work in the storyline. Again, a full 12 years before he became, what do you say, the most begrudging convert in all of England or something like that. And it's almost a sense in which he's being drawn. And I kind of repeat that because he may not appreciate what's occurring, but he's recognizing it at the same time.
It's irresistible grace.
Yeah, I don't want to put any theological labels on it. But
the thing that I thought of is, I can't remember if it's Mere Christianity because it's been years since I've read it, but in one of his books, he talks about being pursued by the hound of heaven.
Right.
And so sort of the more common trope is, the hounds of hell or something like that. But he describes the hound of heaven as being relentlessly pursued by something that's relentlessly drawing you on, and maybe even against your will to meet this strange God.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up that poem as being the one that you felt was really powerful. I took a different direction with the poem that I selected.
You're going to do one of the dark ones?
I did. I selected De Profundis because I think that particular poem kind of deals with the depths of his anger toward God. And, clearly he's trying to reconcile this notion of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-sovereign God with the existence of evil and of suffering. And he's having a really hard time with this. And I'll just sort of read the end of the poem to maybe encapsulate it. It says, "O universal strength, I know it well. It is but froth and folly to rebel, for thou art Lord and hast the keys of hell. Yet I will not bow down to thee nor love thee, for looking in my own heart I can prove thee and know this frail bruised being is above thee. Our love, our hope, our thirsting for the right, our mercy and long seeking of the light, shall we change these for thy relentless might? Laugh then and slay, shatter all things of worth, heap torment still on torment for thy mirth. Thou art not Lord while there are men on earth."
That's tough.
Ooh, that gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, evidently I noticed that as well, because I had underlined some of the parts that you just read. Yeah. For thou art Lord and hast the keys of hell. That's Christ, right? I mean, he knows who he's talking to.
Right. But at the same time, he's saying, I'm not going to bow down to you. I'm not going to love you. I'm not going to work. You're just threatening me with hell, basically. You're trying to threaten me into loving you. And that's not how this works. So he doesn't have any concept of grace yet. For him, it seems like for him, there's still this sort of legalistic quid pro quo where he feels like in order to be accepted by God, perhaps he has to jump through a certain number of hoops or do the right religious sorts of things. But then at the same time, he's sitting in judgment upon God saying, I have proven thee, meaning I'm above you and I've tested you and I've found you wanting.
And you're not Lord as long as I'm here.
Yeah. And as long as men are on earth, you're not the king. So for me, that was certainly an eye-opening a little insight into Lewis's mind at this time. Now, that does tell me something, though, about evangelism in a strange, twisted sort of way, that you might find people who are hard atheists, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're outside of the outstretched arm of God, like they can get beyond his outstretched arm, right?
Well, and as I've kind of mentioned a little bit so far, oftentimes atheists live inconsistently with their own alleged convictions.
Right.
Claiming to have a materialist viewpoint, but then talking about this God or being angry at God. And it's like, who are you angry at? There is no God.
Right.
I can remember one time I was in a previous church setting. I was a youth leader, and I remember one time talking to a young lady who straight up said, I'm an atheist. And I was like, okay. And we continued on through the program, and at the end of the night, I said, all right, I'm going to pray. Does anyone have any prayer requests? She put her hand up and she was like, yeah, can you please pray for so-and-so because of this? And it's like,
that's an interesting
request for an atheist, but sure, I'll pray.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you kind of, I think you kind of see that same thing with Lewis, right? Where he, on the one hand, curses God, on the other hand, says God doesn't exist, and sort of even sets himself up to be his own God in certain respects. But then by the point where you're actually reading, he's beginning to say, I wonder if there is a God out there, and I wouldn't mind actually getting to know him. And I think that's really fascinating.
Starting to not mind getting to know him, but also maybe worrying, am I getting pulled into the undertow here or what? I'm going to get sucked over the edge of the world.
So all in all, I think this was a really interesting read. Didn't take long at all. I mean, I think I read the whole thing in like an hour. And I will be honest, I'm not a mythological expert, so there were some language in here that was not familiar to me. But I'm sure some of the podcast nerds out there who are mythology experts would have no problem jumping right in.
There was one name that I had to Google. I think it was like Desdemona or something like that. I forget now. But I thought it was a powerful read as well, and I am not a poetry guy. Despite having been an English major in college, I was never a big poetry guy. But I really did enjoy these and enjoyed that insight into Lewis's character. I never really knew about this book until just recently when we started talking about it.
Yeah. So what do you have any closing thoughts or anything else that you'd like to add just about, kind of insight into Lewis or the book itself?
I would say that, as you said, don't assume that just because someone's an atheist or professes to be an atheist, that that's the end of the story for them. That was not the end of the story for Lewis. I would also say that, it's okay to read books that aren't explicitly Christian. This was not written by a Christian, so it's not as though you would walk into a Christian bookstore right next to the section with the Precious Moments figurines and be like, oh, this is a book that I should give to my grandmother. The first poem is called Satan Speaks.
Right.
But is there spiritual value in reading something like this? Absolutely. Can I see God in this? And can I see Lewis's desperate search for God and his desperation to want to no longer be out in the rain and to want to be in the house of the beloved where the lights are on? And we know what kind of a Christian that Lewis became later on, and how fruitful he was with his apologetic writing, with his fiction writing, the Narnia series, the Space Trilogy, which I also love. All of those things, we see the seeds of those in this book.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well, thank you, Seth, for taking the opportunity to talk with me here today about spirits and bondage. I would definitely commend this book to our audience for their reading. Take some time with it, chew on it, and be encouraged by it, because you can see, like I said, even in the midst of some of the depravity and some of the spiritual frustration that you see in the writings of Lewis, the Lord is drawing him and calling Lewis to himself. So thank you very much. We'll see you guys on the next episode.